A man who answered every missing person's phone. A small town in Oregon had a strange pattern. Phones of missing people would ring days after their disappearance, and a deep, unfamiliar male voice would answer calmly saying, "They're not missing, they're here." The police traced several numbers to an abandoned radio tower that hadn't had power since 1982. Wilder, Oregon wasn't the kind of town you'd expect to make the news. It sat nestled between mist-drenched pine forests and winding two-lane highways that trucks rarely used anymore. The population hovered under 800. It had a single diner, a hardware store, a gas station that still used analog pumps, and an old post office that closed at 3 p.m. sharp every day. No one locked their doors. The biggest headlines in the local paper were about lost cats or high school bake sales. And I moved there in early October. I was looking for quiet. After a brutal burnout working in tech support in Seattle, Wilder felt like a place where I could breathe. I found a small cabin rental on the edge of town, cheap, partially furnished, and just remote enough that I could hear myself think. The cabin was modest. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and thyme. There was a rotary phone on the wall in the kitchen, which I found amusing more than anything. The landlord, Mr. Cole, shrugged when I asked if it still worked. Maybe, he said. Don't know who'd be calling you anyway. Everything felt like a slowed down version of real life. The town breathed in long, lazy sighs. My first week passed in a fog of tea unpacking and long walks beneath orange-leaved trees. I met a few neighbors, though they kept to themselves. It was a week later when I saw the missing poster. Taped to the window of the diner, it showed a smiling young woman named Elena Marks, early 30s, blonde. Last seen 3 days prior walking along Route 19 near dusk. What happened to her? I asked the waitress. She barely looked up. Don't know. People vanish sometimes. That answer, it didn't sit right with me. Over the next few days, I noticed more posters, all recent. A boy named Kyle, age 10. An older man named Grant. A couple passing through. All disappeared in the past 6 weeks. None found. I tried to ask around, but people grew tight-lipped. Even the sheriff, an older man with sun-stained skin, brushed it off. Sometimes folks don't wanna be found, he muttered. That's all there is. But that didn't explain what I heard one night. I had just finished a late dinner and was rinsing my plate when the rotary phone in the kitchen rang. The sound was jarring, sharp, and sudden, like it had been waiting to be remembered. I stared at it. Who would call? I didn't even know the number. After a few moments, I picked it up. Hello? There was static, then a click, and then silence. I waited, breathing, the cord coiled around my fingers. A soft voice came through, almost too faint to hear. They're not missing. They're here. Then the line went dead. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I walked into town with a strange heaviness clinging to me. When I mentioned the call to Mr. Cole, he frowned. No one's used that phone in years, he said. You sure it rang? I nodded. He didn't ask more questions, but his expression told me I shouldn't bring it up again. That evening, I drove to the diner for dinner. As I waited for my burger, I overheard an old man talking to the waitress. She said the phone rang. Yesterday, he said, hushed. Same voice, same words, just like last time. The waitress nodded grimly. Third one this week. When I leaned in and asked what they meant, they fell silent. The old man looked at me like he regretted even speaking. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. He handed it to me. It was an article from 1982. The headline read, "6 locals disappear calls trace back to abandoned tower." There was a photo beneath tall skeletal radio tower on the outskirts of Wilder. In the article, the same phrase appeared in bold text. "They're not missing. They're here." I asked where the tower was. The old man shook his head. "No one goes near it. No power up there. Hasn't been in decades. But sometimes phones still ring." It sounded ridiculous, like an urban legend passed down in a forgotten corner of the world. But I couldn't stop thinking about that voice. I walked back to the cabin in near silence, the trees creaking in the wind, like they knew something I didn't. That night, I unplugged the rotary phone. But even as I tried to sleep, I swore I could still hear it ring. Not out loud, but somewhere in the walls, somewhere in me. The next day, I woke with a sore throat and a ringing in my ears. At first, I blamed it on the dry autumn air, or maybe I was coming down with something. But there was this uncomfortable feeling like I had been listening to someone whisper all night, just outside my window. I checked, of course. Nothing there. But the leaves near the porch looked disturbed, like someone had been walking back and forth. I didn't want to overreact. It's easy to get jumpy when you're alone in a strange place, especially in the woods. I told myself it was nothing until I went into town again. The diner was quieter than usual. The waitress, the same one from before, looked pale, tired. When she brought my coffee, I noticed her hands were shaking. "They got another one," she muttered without me asking. Who, I asked, feeling the familiar chill crawl up my spine. "Teenager. Sam Denton. His mom said he never came home last night. But his phone rang this morning. She didn't even blink. They answered. She said it like a confession, like she wanted to forget it but couldn't." I left the diner without finishing my coffee. I had a name now, Sam Denton. I looked him up on my phone, scouring local forums and message boards. His photo popped up in a missing thread, already filling with speculation. One comment stood out, buried near the bottom. "My sister swears she heard his voice through the wall last night. She lives across town." That didn't make sense. Wilder wasn't big, but it wasn't a one-street village. How could his voice travel through walls? That evening, I decided to walk the edge of town, toward the forest near Route 19, the place where Elena Marks had disappeared. The trees were thick, their bare branches twisting into each other like tangled fingers. I brought a flashlight even though the sun wasn't down yet. There was something magnetic about the silence, a wrongness. It was then I noticed a sound behind me, not footsteps, buzzing, like a phone vibrating against wood. I turned and scanned the forest. Nothing. But the buzzing continued low and muffled as though coming from beneath the ground. I moved closer to a crooked tree and saw what looked like a tiny gap in the roots. And from inside it impossibly, I saw light. I dropped to my knees and leaned in. A cell phone, lit up face down in the soil, buzzing again and again. I pulled it out. The screen was cracked, smeared with dirt, but I could still read the message. Incoming call, Mom. And underneath that, the contact photo of a teenager, Sam Denton. The phone stopped vibrating the second I touched it. The screen turned black. I tapped it, held the power button, nothing. No battery symbol, no signal bars, like it wasn't really on in the first place. I ran back to the cabin. I told myself I should call the sheriff, but I didn't. I wasn't sure what I'd say. I found a dead kid's phone under a tree, and it tried to call his mom. Who would believe me? Instead, I put the phone on my kitchen table and stared at it for hours. It didn't ring again. But that night, I started hearing things, faint noises from the phone's speaker even though it stayed black. A low, slow voice, almost like a breath against my ear. I could make out the words, but it wasn't my imagination. It was real. I recorded it with my own phone, played it back, and in the recording underneath the static, I heard it clearly. They're not missing. They're here. The next morning, I drove to the sheriff's office. He wasn't in, but his deputy, a younger woman named Cassidy, agreed to speak to me. When I played her the recording, she froze. Her eyes went wide. She pulled a drawer open, took out a dusty cassette tape in a clear case, and pushed it into a small player on her desk. The voice that came through was the same, not similar, the same. Cassidy looked at me. This was recorded in 1982, when they found the last tower message. Boto, is that possible? She didn't answer, just shook her head. You need to leave that cabin, she said finally. Now. I went home, shaken. Packed a small bag, threw it in the car. But something kept me from leaving. I wanted to know the truth. I wanted to understand. That night, around 3 a.m., the rotary phone in my kitchen rang again. I had left it unplugged. It wasn't supposed to be working. I didn't want to answer. Every instinct told me not to, but I did. Hello? The voice came through, steady and calm. They're not missing. They're here. I stayed silent. Then it added something new. You're here too now. I dropped the receiver. The lights in the cabin flickered. My phone lit up on its own. Notifications from numbers I didn't recognize. Dozens of them. I opened one message. It said, "Look outside." So I did. And what I saw just beyond the edge of the tree line made my skin go cold. Shapes. Dozens of them. Just standing. Not moving. Watching. They didn't move. Not at first. Just stood there tall, narrow, and impossibly still. Some were barely silhouettes between the trees. Others stood closer to the edge of the clearing just beyond the porch light's reach. I counted at least 20, all facing the cabin, all watching me. I backed away from the window. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I grabbed my car keys and the phone, the one I'd found buried near the crooked tree, and bolted for the door. But when I yanked it open, I stopped cold. There was one of them standing at the foot of the porch steps, closer than the rest. I could see its face, or rather the suggestion of one. Smooth skin, no eyes, like someone had pressed a wax figure too close to a flame. And it was holding something, a phone, cracked, smudged with dirt. My phone, the one I had left inside the cabin. That was impossible. I turned around to check, saw my phone still lying on the kitchen table. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in a corner of the living room, holding the phone I had found near the tree, watching the window, jumping at every rustle of wind or crack of the house settling. And at some point, maybe near dawn, I must have passed out. I woke to birdsong, sunlight. The woods looked normal again. No figures, no signs anyone or anything had been there. I grabbed my bag and ran to the car. This time, I didn't hesitate. I drove straight out of Wilder. Didn't stop until I hit the next town over. There, in a tiny gas station bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that it had all been some kind of waking nightmare, until I pulled out my phone to check the time. It had changed. The wallpaper, the photo of my niece and nephew, was gone, replaced by static, white noise, and at the top of the screen was a new notification: Missed Call Wilder Tower. I never gave that name to anyone, never searched it, never said it aloud. I threw the phone in the trash and left it behind. That was 6 weeks ago. I haven't told anyone the full story, not until now. And I wouldn't have written this at all except for what happened last night. At 3 a.m., my landline rang. The caller ID said Wilder Tower. I didn't answer, but I could hear it through the receiver, breathing. Then a whisper, "You're still here?" I should have moved. That night, after the phone rang, I should have packed what little I had and vanished into a place where towers didn't hum, beneath the soil and voices couldn't reach me. But I didn't. I stayed, and I made one fatal mistake. I tried to understand it. I told myself, if I just know the rules, it'll be safe. But that's not how Wilder works. That's not how he works. Because he doesn't want you safe. He wants you listening. The next night, I unplugged the landline. Midnight came. The phone still rang. The one I'd thrown away. The one from Wilder. I don't know how it found its way back into my drawer inside a pair of socks I hadn't worn in months. But it was there, and it was ringing, and the screen simply said, "Answer me." I stared at it for a long time. Then I did. There was no voice at first, just the faint looping sound of static. And behind that, something I can only describe as breathing underwater. Then he spoke. That same deep, calm, unfaltering voice that had haunted every missing person's last phone call. "You are not missing." My throat closed up. "You are here. I tried to hang up, but the screen didn't respond. The power button didn't work. You came too close to the tower. The room darkened as if the lights were dimming from inside my eyes. They all hear it eventually. The ones who wander too far from the path. The ones who don't mind their names. I felt cold fingers wrap around my spine. Inside me, not outside. Like his words were threading into my bones. You listen. Then a click. Silence. And I was alone again. I smashed the phone with a hammer the next morning. Then I burned it. Watched the plastic warp and melt under flame. But that night, the TV turned on by itself. At exactly 3, the screen was dark except for a faint signal bar in the top right corner. It said, "Connected to Wilder Tower." I left the house that morning, got in my car, and drove until my gas light blinked red. I didn't care where I was going. I just wanted away. That's when the roadside billboards started. Nothing flashy, just rusted metal and faded paint like they'd been there for years. But they all said the same thing. "You're not missing. You're here." I was 60 miles from the nearest town. I hadn't passed a single other car in over an hour. But I saw a man standing just off the shoulder next to a broken payphone. He waved. In his hand was a receiver dangling off the cord, and I swear to God, I could hear it ringing from inside my dashboard. I stopped the car, only for a second. I looked at the glove compartment. It was closed, but vibrating. Something inside was ringing. I didn't open it. I put the car in reverse, spun around, and drove the other direction. Back home. I thought maybe I could beat it by going backward. Like if I returned to where it started, I could undo it. But Wilder doesn't let go. You can return what he's already claimed, and you only ever get to leave when he's ready. I stayed up the whole next week. No sleep, no calls. I tore out every wire in the walls, lived off canned soup and flashlight batteries. I painted the windows black, destroyed every screen, burned the old radio in my attic just to be safe. But on the 7th night, the silence broke, not with a ring, not with a voice, but with footsteps. Inside the house, I could hear them walking the hallway, slowly, each step soft but deliberate, stopping outside my bedroom door. Then tap, 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 knuckles, human. 3 knocks. I held my breath, didn't move, didn't blink, and then a voice. Not from the hallway, from the mirror behind me. "You should have answered." I turned just enough to see the reflection. It was me, but the version in the mirror was smiling and holding the phone. My phone, the one I had burned. He lifted it slowly to his ear, and without speaking, he listened. Then the mirror cracked. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up outside at dawn, face down in the wet grass. My hands were covered in soil. I think I'd been digging. There was a shape in the dirt, a small hole, a mound, like a shallow grave. Inside, buried in the earth, was a new phone. It was already ringing. I didn't answer, but I know what it would have said. "You're not missing, you're here, and so are the others. Because if you listen hard enough, you'll hear them too. The ones who vanished without a trace, They're still calling, still trying to warn us. But the tower answers first. It always does. So if your phone rings after midnight and the caller ID says something you don't recognize, don't answer, or do. It doesn't matter, because the voice on the other end already knows you're listening. And once you do, you're already gone.